Gerald Chavez stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan penthouse, watching the city pulse with cold, glittering life 40 stories below. At 35 years old, he had everything the world defined as success. His venture capital empire, Chavez Ascent Capital, was ruthless, precise, and had made him a titan of finance. The penthouse, stretching across 5,000 square feet, was an altar to control. Polished marble, custom-built minimalist luxury, and art pieces worth millions. Yet, standing there in his perfectly tailored suit, Gerald felt nothing but emptiness. His entire existence had become an exercise in control, removing any variable that might introduce chaos or emotion. The apartment was silent, lacking warmth, just clean lines and expensive emptiness. It was past 11 at night. Gerald, pouring himself a glass of water, noticed the hallway light on near the staff quarters, a section he rarely acknowledged. The staff was meant to be invisible and silent. The girl who lived in the shadows, Celia Flores, had arrived 6 months ago. At 26, she had left behind her life to work and save enough to fund her younger brother's college tuition and secure expensive medication for her grandmother. She moved through the apartment like a ghost, careful not to disturb the perfect order of his world. In 6 months, they had exchanged perhaps 20 words, mostly brief instructions delivered without eye contact. Celia survived by being invisible, counting the days until she could return home. That night, Gerald had hosted a business dinner, and the cleanup had taken hours. Exhaustion weighed heavy on Celia as she retreated to her room, noting the door did not have a lock. She peeled off her uniform and stood in a simple cotton shirt when she heard the door handle turn. Time fractured. The door swung open, and Gerald Chavez, still in his tuxedo, stood in the doorway, his expression frozen in shock. Their eyes met. Celia's hands flew to clutch the fabric against her chest, her shirt slipping off her shoulder. Her face burned with humiliation. "I am sorry," Celia whispered, her voice breaking. She took the blame out of pure instinct to survive. Gerald seemed to snap back to awareness, his eyes widening with horror, not at her, but at himself. "I am sorry," he stammered, quickly pulling the door shut. Celia sank onto her bed, trembling, terrified of losing the only job that supported her family. Outside, Gerald stood frozen. The image of Celia's terrified and vulnerable face seared itself into his memory. He realized with sickening clarity that he was the cause of that fear. Power did not matter, only that he held all of it. The accidental moment had shaken him, the controlled businessman, and for the first time in years, Gerald felt smaller. Celia didn't sleep. She rehearsed apologies and calculated how long her savings would last if she was dismissed. By dawn, she had convinced herself that staying invisible had failed, so she would face him directly. She dressed in her crisp uniform, hands shaking as she buttoned it, and walked into the kitchen where Gerald sat with his espresso and financial reports. "Mr. Chavez, about last night. I take full responsibility. I should have been more careful. If you need me to leave, I understand." Gerald looked up, and for the first time, she saw something other than cold indifference in his eyes. He set down his cup with deliberate care. "Miss Flores, the fault was entirely mine. I entered your private space without knocking. You have every right to feel safe and respected in this home." The words came out stiff, unpracticed, as if he was speaking a language he'd forgotten. "I'm installing a lock on your door today, and I owe you an apology. A real one. I'm deeply sorry." Celia stared at him, her carefully constructed script crumbling. In her experience, powerful men never apologized. They justified, blamed, or simply erased you. I thank you, Mr. Chavez," she managed, her eyes stinging with unexpected tears. "Gerald," he said quietly, "when we're here, just Gerald." That conversation should have been the end of it, a brief disruption in their parallel existences. But something had shifted in Gerald. The woman he'd glimpsed wasn't an invisible ghost maintaining his perfect world. She was terrified, vulnerable, and somehow still standing there taking responsibility for his mistake. It haunted him. Over the following weeks, Gerald found himself noticing things he'd trained himself to ignore. Celia's uniform was worn at the cuffs, meticulously mended but clearly old. She moved with the efficiency of someone who couldn't afford wasted motion. And late at night, when she thought the penthouse empty, he heard her on the phone speaking rapid Spanish, her voice tight with worry. One evening, Gerald worked late in his study when Celia brought him coffee, something she'd done dozens of times. But this time, he saw the small, worn notebook tucked under her arm, pages filled with sketches. "What are you drawing?" he asked, surprising them both. Celia froze. "It's nothing, Mr. Gerald. Just, it helps me think." "May I see?" He held out his hand and, after a moment of hesitation, she handed him the notebook. The pages were covered in architectural sketches. Buildings, bridges, intricate structural designs with notes on load-bearing calculations and material choices. They were remarkable. "You studied architecture?" 2 years before my parents died. My brother was still in high school. Someone had to work. Gerald studied the sketches, seeing the dream deferred in every careful line. "These are exceptional. You should finish your degree." Celia's laugh was getter. "With what money? My brother's tuition takes everything. My grandmother's medication is expensive. Architecture school is a luxury I can't afford, and I made peace with that." "What if you could?" Gerald asked, the question forming before he fully understood why. "Then I'd be living in a different world than this one," Celia replied, gently taking back her notebook. "But this world is the one I have, and I'm grateful for it. Good night, Gerald." If you can't stand people who treat others as invisible servants rather than human beings with dreams and struggles, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Type "Nobody deserves that," because what happened next changed everything. Gerald couldn't let it go. He called his assistant the next morning with unusual instructions. "I need information on a scholarship program, anonymous donation, full tuition, room, board for a student at Cornell." He provided the details of Celia's younger brother, Miguel Flores, making it clear the contribution was to remain completely untraceable. 3 weeks later, Gerald was working when he heard a sound he'd never heard in his sterile penthouse. Celia sobbing. Not quiet tears, but the kind of crying that comes from a dam finally breaking. He found her in the hallway, phone clutched in her hand, sliding down the wall. "Celia, what's wrong?" He kneeled beside her, his hand hovering uncertainly near her shoulder. "Miguel got a scholarship," she gasped between sobs. full ride, 2 years guaranteed, renewable. He called me screaming. He thought he'd have to drop out next semester, and now I don't understand. Things like this don't happen to people like us. Gerald felt something crack open in his chest. Maybe they should happen more often, he said quietly. Maybe you both deserve good things. Celia looked at him with those dark eyes, still wet with tears, and for a moment the vast gulf between their worlds narrowed to nothing. Thank you for saying that, she whispered, even if the world doesn't work that way. But Gerald was beginning to think it could. That night, he made another call, this time to his lawyers. There were more people like Celia, more deferred dreams. He had the resources to change that, and for the first time in years, using his wealth for something beyond accumulation felt purposeful. The dynamic shifted. Celia still worked, but their conversations grew longer, more real. Gerald found himself asking about her life in genuine curiosity rather than polite distance. She told him about growing up in a small town, about her parents who had worked 3 jobs between them to send her to college, about Miguel's brilliance and her grandmother's stories. In return, Gerald began sharing fragments of his own story. The father who equated emotion with weakness, the boarding schools, the relentless drive to succeed that had left him empty at the summit. I learned early that control was safety, he admitted one night over tea she'd made. If you control everything, nothing can hurt you. But nothing can touch you either, Celia said gently. That's not safety. That's just a very expensive cage. Her words settled into him like stones into still water, sending ripples through carefully maintained defenses. Gerald began leaving architectural books on the kitchen counter, first editions, rare texts. Celia responded by leaving custom-blended teas with handwritten notes about the herbs. They were gifts that couldn't be refused, small gestures that built a bridge neither had planned to cross. One Saturday, Gerald did something unprecedented. I have tickets to a private gallery opening tonight, contemporary architecture and design. Would you accompany me? Not as staff, he added quickly, seeing her expression, as my guest, if you're interested. She stood very still. Gerald, I can't afford. Don't need to afford anything. Just say yes or no. Yes, she breathed, the word escaping before caution could catch it. That evening, watching Celia examine the architectural models with passionate expertise, discussing load-bearing innovation with the designer, Gerald realized with devastating clarity that he had fallen completely, irrevocably in love, not with an employee or a convenient presence, but with the brilliant, resilient woman who had survived in the shadows of his world while maintaining her humanity. Everything he had built his life avoiding, risk, vulnerability, connection, suddenly seemed worth it for the chance to see her smile like that every day. If you believe that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and loved for who they truly are, regardless of status or wealth, hit that subscribe button. People who treat others as invisible won't. And you need to hear what Gerald did about his feelings. Gerald spent a sleepless week after the gallery, his legendary control unraveling. He canceled meetings, distracted and useless. Finally, on a Thursday evening, he found Celia in the kitchen preparing dinner and simply said, "We need to talk, please." They sat in the living room, the city lights providing the only illumination. Gerald, who negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, struggled to find words. Celia, I have developed real, profound feelings for you. I'm not saying this lightly. I've spent most of my life avoiding exactly this kind of vulnerability, but I can't anymore. I think about you constantly. You've made me want to be a better person, someone worthy of your respect. Celia's hands twisted in her lap. Gerald, I'm your employee. The power dynamic? I know, which is why this conversation is happening at all. I won't put you in a position where you feel pressured or trapped, but I need you to know the truth, even if it means you leave. He took a shaking breath. If you have any feelings for me, any at all, I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. If you don't, I'll write you a glowing reference and help you find another position with better pay. Your choice. No consequences either way. Celia closed her eyes, tears sliding down her cheeks. You think I haven't been fighting this? Every time you left those books, every conversation, every moment you treated me like I mattered, I had to remind myself this wasn't real, that billionaires don't fall for their housekeepers, that I was being foolish. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze directly. But I feel it too. God help me, I do. Gerald moved closer, but didn't touch her. Then let me do this right. Let me correct the imbalance. He pulled out an envelope. Effective immediately, you're terminated as my housekeeper. Severance included, 6 months' salary. You're free of any employment obligation to me. Celia stared at the envelope, confusion warring with hurt. You're firing me? Yes, because I can't date an employee, and I very much want to date you. He produced a second envelope. This is an offer for a different position, project analyst at Chavez Ascent Capital. Your role would be bringing a human-centered perspective to our operations, championing employee welfare. $100,000 salary, full benefits, completely separate from any personal relationship. You can take this job and tell me you're not interested romantically, they're not connected, or you can take the severance and find something else entirely. Both are genuine offers. Celia opened the second envelope with trembling hands, scanning the formal offer letter. You're serious. Completely. And Celia, Miguel's scholarship is now permanent, covering all 4 years. That's not contingent on anything. It's done regardless of your decision. She started crying again, but this time she was smiling through the tears. You're impossible, you know that. Then she launched herself into his arms, and Gerald caught her, holding her like she was the most precious thing he'd ever possessed. Because she was. Celia accepted the position at Chavez Ascent Capital, and she transformed it. Using her intimate understanding of struggling workers, she advocated fiercely for wage increases, better benefits, and work-life balance initiatives. Gerald watched her present to his board of directors, articulate and passionate, and approved every recommendation. His company's culture shifted from ruthless efficiency to purposeful growth that valued people. Their relationship blossomed in parallel. Gerald courted Celia properly. Dinners, museums, long walks where they talked about everything. He met Miguel via video call and was grilled thoroughly by the protective younger brother. Celia helped Gerald reconnect with his estranged sister, facilitating the difficult conversation he'd avoided for years. They made each other better, fuller, more human. One night, nearly a year after that fateful intrusion, Celia mentioned she'd never seen the penthouse rooftop. Gerald smiled mysteriously and said, "Let's fix that." Comment, "Love wins" if you're Team Celia and Gerald. The empty, controlling life can't win against real human connection. Now watch what happens when Gerald shows her what he's been planning. Gerald had transformed the rooftop into a lush garden. Trees, flowers, a small fountain. Fairy lights created a canopy of stars. At the center stood an architectural model, intricate and beautiful. "What is this?" Celia asked, breathless. "The Flores Opportunity Center," Gerald said, pulling her close. "A full scholarship program and mentorship network for underprivileged students pursuing architecture. Fully funded endowment of $20 million. I'm announcing it next week." He turned her to face him, dropping to one knee. "Celia Flores, you walked into my life as someone I tried to make invisible. Instead, you made me visible to myself. You showed me that wealth without purpose is just expensive emptiness, that control without compassion is just fear. You made me want to be worthy of you." He opened a velvet box, revealing a simple, stunning ring. "I don't deserve you, but I'm asking anyway. Will you marry me?" Celia dropped to her knees beside him, framing his face with her hands. "You walked into my room that night, and it was the worst moment of my life. But it led to this, to you seeing me, to me seeing you. Yes, Gerald, yes to all of it." They kissed as the city sprawled below them, no longer cold and distant, but full of possibility. Gerald had spent his life building walls, and Celia had spent hers trying to be invisible behind them. Now they were building something else entirely, a foundation built on respect, purpose, and love that transformed both their worlds. 6 months later, they married in a simple ceremony with Miguel walking Celia down the aisle. The Flores Opportunity Fund had already awarded its first scholarships, and Chavez Ascent Capital was being recognized for its revolutionary employee programs. Gerald stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows again, but this time Celia stood beside him, her hand in his, and the penthouse was filled with warmth, laughter, and a collection of architectural sketches that she was finally pursuing again. The accidental intrusion that should have been a disaster became their origin story. Proof that sometimes the moments that break us open are the ones that let the light in. If you watched or listened up to this point, comment the country you are watching this from. Represent your country.